The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of Riverside Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the city. The courtyard was filled with polished cars, designer backpacks, and laughter that carried the confidence of kids who never had to worry about much. Among them walked Sophie Grant, the daughter of a wealthy real estate developer. Her hair was perfect, her phone new, her uniform freshly tailored to look like it came from a fashion magazine. She moved like she owned the place, and in her mind she did. As Sophie and her friends stood by their lockers gossiping, the sound of a mop bucket squeaking across the floor made them all turn. A quiet girl, Amara Johnson, walked by, clutching a small notebook against her chest. Her shoes were scuffed, her uniform slightly worn. Everyone knew her father, Mr. Johnson, the school janitor who worked nights cleaning classrooms after everyone else had gone home. Sophie smirked. Well, look who's here, the janitor's kid. Amara paused but didn't respond. She kept walking, eyes fixed on the ground. Sophie's friend Lily whispered, I heard she got in on a scholarship. Sophie's grin widened. Of course she did. Probably mops the floors for extra credit. A few students laughed. One even took a picture. Amara's hands tightened around her notebook, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only defense. Sophie stepped closer. What's the matter? Can't talk? Or do they teach you to stay quiet when you're cleaning up after us? The hallway went still. Even the laughter faded. Before Amara could reply, a teacher appeared at the end of the corridor, and Sophie quickly turned back to her friends, pretending to fix her hair. As Amara slipped into her classroom, Sophie whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, maybe if her dad cleaned faster, the hallways wouldn't smell so cheap. The words echoed after her, sharper than any slap. Amara sat down at her desk, opened her notebook, and began writing in neat, steady handwriting. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. But deep inside, she made herself a promise, one that Sophie would regret ever giving her a reason to keep. By the next week, the whispers had spread across Riverside Academy like wildfire. Everywhere Amara Johnson went, she could feel the stares. Quiet, judgmental, cruel. At lunch, she sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria, eating from a plain brown lunch bag, while the rest of the students laughed at tables filled with expensive food from the school cafe. The sound of a soda can cracking open made her flinch slightly. It was Sophie, flanked by her usual group of friends. Well, if it isn't the janitor's princess, Sophie said loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. What's on the menu today? Leftovers from the trash? Her friends burst into laughter. Amara looked up briefly, her expression calm. Just food I can afford, she said softly. The laughter stopped for half a second. No one expected her to answer. Sophie's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Amara's tone stayed steady. You don't need to be rich to eat well. You just need good manners. That one line drew a few gasps. Even Sophie's friends exchanged uneasy glances. Sophie forced a laugh, masking her irritation. Cute. You practice that in front of your mirror while your dad sweeps the floor? Amara stood, gathering her tray. No. My dad doesn't sweep floors because he has to. He does it because he believes every job deserves pride. She started to walk away, but Sophie couldn't let her have the last word. You keep talking like that, maybe one day you'll be the principal or something. The sarcasm made everyone laugh again, but this time, Amara smiled. Maybe I will. She dropped her tray off at the counter, nodded politely to the cafeteria staff, and walked out with her head high. Later that day, during history class, Sophie noticed Amara's hand shoot up first for every question. She answered with confidence, precision, and depth, the kind of knowledge no amount of money could buy. After the third correct answer, Mr. Collins, their teacher, smiled. Excellent work, Amara. You clearly did your reading. Sophie rolled her eyes. Of course she did. What else would she do all night? She's not exactly busy. A few students laughed nervously. Mr. Collins frowned. That's enough, Sophie. Hard work deserves respect, no matter who it comes from. Sophie sank into her seat, cheeks red. For the first time, she felt a flicker of embarrassment. Not because she'd been corrected, but because she'd been shown up by someone she'd decided wasn't worth noticing. When the bell rang, Amara packed her books slowly. As she passed Sophie's desk, she paused just long enough to say quietly, You don't have to like me, but you'll remember me. Then she left. Sophie stared after her, that calm confidence echoing louder than any insult. She didn't know it yet, but those words would come back to haunt her, in front of the entire school. It was a bright Monday morning at Riverside Academy, and the hallways buzzed with rumors. Word had spread that the school's longtime principal, Mr. Harris, was retiring, and today the new principal would be introduced at an all-school assembly. Everyone speculated who it might be: a board member, a famous educator, maybe even someone from the district office. Sophie Grant strutted through the crowd, her friends trailing behind. "Whoever it is," she said with a smirk, "they'd better have style. This school's gotten boring." "Maybe they'll finally raise tuition," one of her friends joked. Sophie laughed. "Good. That'll keep the janitor's family out." As the bell rang, the students filed into the auditorium, where a large banner hung over the stage. "Welcome our new principal." Teachers took their seats on the side rows. The head of the school board, Mr. Cooper, stepped up to the podium. "Good morning, students. Today marks a new chapter for Riverside Academy. We've selected someone who represents both excellence and empathy, values this school stands for." Sophie leaned toward Lily. "Excellence and empathy? Sounds like a bore already." The auditorium quieted as Mr. Cooper smiled. "Please welcome our new principal, Dr. Naomi Johnson." Applause began politely until the doors opened. Walking down the center aisle, tall, poised, and composed, was a black woman in a navy blue suit, carrying herself with quiet authority. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, the kind that saw everything. Sophie's smile faded instantly. Johnson? Then she saw her. Amara, sitting in the second row, stood up proudly. The woman on stage smiled directly at her, a smile of recognition. Whispers rippled through the auditorium. "Wait, is that her mom? Johnson, like the janitor? No way." Mr. Cooper stepped aside as Dr. Johnson took the microphone. Her voice was warm but firm. "Thank you for the welcome. It's an honor to return to this school, the same halls where I once dreamed of helping young minds grow." She paused, scanning the audience. "I know some of you by face, some by name, and some by reputation. But what matters most here isn't wealth, family, or popularity. It's character." Her gaze landed briefly, deliberately, on Sophie Grant. Sophie's stomach dropped. Dr. Johnson continued, "Every student deserves respect. Every person in this building matters, from the teachers to the staff to the custodians who keep our classrooms clean. This school is not defined by privilege. It's defined by the people who give it heart." A wave of murmurs spread through the students. Sophie sank lower in her seat, cheeks burning. Dr. Johnson smiled again, the warmth returning to her tone. "I look forward to getting to know each of you, and seeing not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are." Applause erupted, louder this time. Amara clapped proudly, eyes shining. Sophie, meanwhile, sat frozen, her world turning upside down. The janitor's daughter she'd mocked for weeks was the child of the new principal, the woman who now ran the entire school. And for the first time in her life, Sophie Grant wished she had kept her mouth shut. That afternoon, Dr. Naomi Johnson called a small group of students to her office. The sunlight streamed through tall blinds, casting long shadows across her desk. Among the names on the list was one that made the room tense before anyone even arrived: Sophie Grant. When Sophie entered, she was already nervous. She had spent the entire morning avoiding eye contact with Amara, who had walked through the halls with quiet confidence, her classmates now whispering in admiration instead of mockery. Inside the office, Dr. Johnson sat behind a polished wooden desk. Her expression was calm, but unreadable. Amara stood beside her mother, not smug or triumphant, just composed. "Please have a seat, Miss Grant," Dr. Johnson said softly. Sophie sat, her palms damp. "Yes, ma'am." Dr. Johnson folded her hands. "Do you know why I asked you here?" Sophie hesitated. "Because of the assembly?" Dr. Johnson's gaze didn't waver. "No, because of what came before it. I've been hearing things about how certain students were treated this semester. Students who didn't fit your idea of belonging." Sophie's throat tightened. I didn't mean anything serious. It was just teasing." Amara finally spoke. "It didn't feel like teasing." The words were soft, but they carried more weight than shouting ever could. Sophie looked down. "I'm sorry, I didn't think—" "That's the problem," Dr. Johnson interrupted, her tone steady. "You didn't think. You assumed." Silence filled the room. Dr. Johnson stood and walked toward the window, hands clasped behind her back. My husband worked as a janitor in this very school for 20 years. Every night while the halls were empty, he cleaned so that students like you could walk into shining classrooms. He never complained. He believed hard work is a kind of dignity. Sophie's eyes widened. Your husband? Yes, Dr. Johnson said. The man you laughed about without knowing his name. Sophie's heart pounded. Shame crept up her neck. Dr. Johnson turned, her gaze firm but not cruel. I don't believe in punishing ignorance with humiliation. I believe in replacing it with understanding. So, for the next 2 weeks, you'll spend an hour after school helping the custodial staff, cleaning, organizing, and seeing firsthand what it means to work with humility. Sophie swallowed hard. You mean janitor work? Dr. Johnson nodded. Yes, unless you think you're above it. Sophie's voice trembled. No, ma'am. Good, Dr. Johnson said quietly. Then use that time to think about the kind of person you want to be when no one's watching. Amara looked at Sophie, not with anger, but with something close to empathy. It's not easy to change, she said gently, but it's possible. Sophie nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Amara. Dr. Johnson gave a small nod. That's a start. As Sophie left the office, she caught her reflection in the hallway window. And for the first time, she didn't see the confident rich girl everyone admired. She saw someone learning, painfully, what it meant to have respect. The next 2 weeks crawled by for Sophie Grant. Every afternoon while her friends went to the cafe or tennis practice, she changed into old clothes and reported to the janitor's supply room. At first, it was humiliating. The smell of cleaning supplies, the sight of empty hallways, the echo of her own footsteps. Mr. Johnson, Amara's father, greeted her kindly each day. Grab a mop, Miss Grant, he'd say. No shortcuts. The floor tells on you when you rush. At first, Sophie barely replied. She mopped mechanically, counting the minutes. But over time, something shifted. She began to notice how much care he put into every task. He wasn't just cleaning. He was protecting the space, making it ready for others. By the 5th day, Sophie stopped checking the clock. She started asking questions. How long have you worked here, Mr. Johnson? Since before you were born, he said with a chuckle. Helped repaint these walls 3 times. My daughter used to wait in the hallway after school, doing homework while I finished up. Sophie swallowed, guilt stirring. That's Amara, right? He nodded proudly. That's her. She used to say, Daddy, one day I'll make this school better for everyone. Guess she meant it. Sophie smiled faintly. She's different. Different doesn't mean less, he said gently. Remember that. When her 2 weeks ended, Sophie didn't feel triumphant. She felt changed. On her last day, she stayed behind after sweeping the gym, making sure every corner shone. As she hung up her apron, Dr. Johnson walked in. She looked at the freshly cleaned floor, then at Sophie. I heard you've been doing good work. Sophie wiped her hands on her jeans. I've learned a lot, ma'am, mostly about myself. Dr. Johnson studied her for a moment. And what did you learn? That respect isn't about who you are. It's about how you treat people. I thought I was better than others because of money. I was wrong. Dr. Johnson nodded slowly. Understanding that makes you stronger, not weaker. I hope you carry it with you. Sophie hesitated, then asked, Do you think Amara would ever forgive me? Dr. Johnson smiled faintly. Ask her yourself. Later that afternoon, Sophie found Amara by her locker. She took a breath. Hey, Amara? Amara turned, cautious but calm. Sophie looked her in the eye. I'm sorry. For everything. Not just the words. For thinking you didn't belong. You belong here more than I ever did. Amara's expression softened. I already forgave you. I just needed to see you mean it. Sophie smiled through the lump in her throat. I do. As the bell rang, the 2 girls walked down the hall side by side, no longer as enemies, not quite as friends, but as equals who understood the cost of ignorance and the value of grace. And in her office upstairs, Dr. Johnson looked out her window, watching them disappear into the sunlight, a quiet smile on her face.